Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Secure 9000 Access Management Workflow demonstration. My name is Carol Vidaro, and I'm the Senior Marketing Communications Manager for Software House. Our expert panelists today are Christina Jin, Director of Sales for Software House, and Jake Jacobson, Technical Sales Specialist for Software House. Jake will be going through a demonstration of the access management workflow for you today. Access management offers a 24/7 solution for managing cardholder access requests without requiring direct involvement from a security team. This allows cardholders to make access requests through an intuitive web-based portal. The self-service capabilities increase the agility of clearance owners' responses to cardholder access requests for temporary and contract employees, workers with drop-in work schedules, or project-based self-organizing teams, and shift and facility changes. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. The webinar is in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, Jake will be taking them throughout the presentation, so please add them using the GoToWebinar panel on the right of your screen. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be sent to all attendees after the webinar. And just to note that the next webinar that we'll be hosting will be regarding the PSX Power Solutions from Life Safety Power. That'll be on December 3rd, and so the communication will be coming shortly. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Jake.
Thank you, Carol. So the access management workflow, Carol kind of ran through some of the key items of what the feature is. I thought I'd kind of cover a couple of key components through a few slides before we jump into the actual demo, to try and give you a little bit of a background about what's involved with the access workflow and what some of those key components are. So first, what I have up here on the screen is on the right-hand side, we're just looking at a company, and that company has cardholders. And then there's clearances that are assigned to those cardholders, which determine their access through a facility, what doors they can go through during what time. So what ties into the access management workflow are a couple of features that tie to the cardholders, as well as the clearances, and a new item which we refer to as an access request site. So in a company where you have cardholders, some of those cardholders may have the ability to request clearances. You might have a company that all of the cardholders may be able to request clearances. And then there's people within Secure that are looked at as approvers. And these are options that are enabled in the record. So an approver, we would kind of look at them as maybe the owner of a clearance. So maybe the manager of an area within a company, whether that's labs or a department, would actually have the ability to manage who has clearance to their area. And in the system, they would be considered an approver. Requesters would be able to log into a portal and be able to fill out a request form. And once that request form is submitted, the approvers are notified by email that they have a pending request. And that approver would then be able to log into the portal as the approver, review that request, and then determine whether to deny or approve the actual request. So if you're looking at it from a single company, that's what I've kind of referenced here. You could also look at it like maybe I'm a company that has 3 regional locations, and I might want to have requesters and approvers that are tied to that location, meaning that the clearances that control the doors in that location and the people, the cardholders that reside at that location, we can build what we call these access request sites that would cater those requesters of the cardholders in that location and the approvers tied to the clearances for that location. So it's a way for us to build out the ability to manage separate locations within a single company to where only those people that reside at those locations can request and approve those clearances. So a couple of different scenarios there. And what is a request site? A request site is where we can tie the cardholders that are considered requesters to the clearances that they can request. Now, not every clearance in the system may be configured for access workflow. Maybe it's a set of clearances that are specific to areas that different managers or supervisors oversee. And what this does is it pushes out that responsibility of assigning the clearances, to those managers versus the administrators, the operators in Secure. So again, the access request site ties the requesters. It's a list of cardholders considered requesters that are allowed to submit the requests. We also define what fields from the requester's cardholder record that the approver can review. In other words, when a request is submitted and the approver goes through that process of reviewing the request, what information can that approver see about the person requesting access? So you can configure that specific to your sites of what information they're allowed to see. And then the list of clearances they're allowed to request. So that's how we tie the requesters and the clearances. We refer to that as a request site. Now the clearances also add a couple of new features. One of them is an approval tab, and the other is a review tab. And the approval tab is where we set the rules for the approval process. And you'll notice on the screen there's an area there where you have no approval needed, which means it's a standard clearance. It's not part of the access request process. You have an auto approve, maybe a clearance that's not a security critical type clearance. Maybe it's everybody should have access to the cafeteria, so or to the courtyard. The ability for them to fill out a request and then have the system just approve it. At least there's the audit in our audit log of that person requesting that access, but it's not a high security type managed clearance, so we can have the system just approve it. And then we have any approver tied to a partition. We have any selected approver, well, a list of specific people that manage that area. And then we have a review tab, which allows us to configure a reviewer rule and set a reoccurring schedule so that specific approvers or reviewers are notified every, let's say, 90 days that they need to log into the portal and review that clearance. And maybe that's tied to policies that every 90 days that needs to be an audit of that area. So that's the tie-in on the clearance is how we associate the rules and which approvers manage that clearance. And then from an audit standpoint, approvers always have the ability to log into that portal and audit the clearances that they manage. And that audit process allows them to select that clearance and view the cardholders that actually have clearance. We can review information about that cardholder. And we can also revoke that clearance. So if, in this case, Ethan Brown was a contractor and he's no longer on site, that approver could audit the clearance and actually go through and revoke the clearance from that person. So they have that full power of being able to log in and at any point in time revoke a clearance. And then what makes a cardholder a requester or an approver? In the person's record, the cardholder record, there's a tab called Web and Mobile. And in that tab, there's the cardholder's email address, and there's the ability for us to associate a Windows principal or through secure basic authentication. And then there's options. The portal actually supports two different licensed features. One is visitor management, and the other is the access workflow. So here is where we would allow this particular cardholder to submit requests, or they're an approver of a clearance. So that's kind of how we enable the records, the cardholders as requesters and approvers. And then the whole workflow process is tied to email notification. So when a requester fills out a request, as soon as that request is submitted, it is then emailed to the actual approvers, which they get a pending request email, which notifies them that they have a pending request, and that a link to the actual portal right in the body of the email, so that they can jump straight over to the portal and log in to review that request. They also get notified via email on outstanding reviews or overdue reviews that have not been reviewed by the review date. So the requesters also get emailed when their request is approved, if their request was rejected, if their clearance was revoked, and soon to expire. If you're using iStar Ultras and you have expiring clearances, then there's that added feature of you can select the number of days that clearance will be valid. So that's part of the actual request process that you can refine that. Now, before leaving and going into the demonstration, one point is that requesters, depending on the scenario, the requesters can request access, obviously for themselves, but there's also that ability to request access for someone else. So if you're a manager or a supervisor, and it's pushed to the higher level management to actually submit requests for the people on their team, that you would be able to select team members as part of the request instead of yourself. So there's a couple of different scenarios there. But I'm going to switch over and jump into the demonstration. And what I have up here is the monitoring application. And what we're going to kind of do is run through some scenarios of some cardholders, requesters submitting requests for clearances, and see the process, assign the clearance, and then we can log in as the approver to do some auditing and then some general auditing through Secure. So I've got 3 different cardholders that are requesters. In the system by itself, I've got hundreds of records, but for the purpose of the demo, I've got 3 different records for 3 different scenarios. On the clearance side of things, I'm going to be requesting 3 different scenarios of different types of clearances. One of those clearances is for the rear door, and this approval rule is basically Ken and myself are the approvers. So when we get a request for this clearance, it's also an iStar Ultra. So this clearance can be assigned for a max of 14 days. And it's a standard request that doesn't have any set features like the north-south clearance. The north-south clearance is a multiple approvals in order, meaning I'm selecting those people who are approvers, but I maybe need to go to the supervisor first and then forward it to the manager or to the director. So more than one person as part of the approval rule. And this is also an I-STAR door, and this is a clearance that can be assigned up to 30 days. And then the other clearance scenario is an auto approve. So there's no extra work to this. It's a clearance that can be assigned for 15 days. And it's a auto approve process. So as soon as the request is submitted, the system auto approves it. And what we do is we get the auditing and secure that John Doe submitted the request and the system approved the assignment of this clearance. So a couple of different scenarios that we're going to walk through. So the portal itself, the secure portal, again, we share this portal between two different features. The first scenario I'm going to run through is for the auto approve of the front door. So I'm going to log in. For Justin Lee. And Justin Lee is going to select the request site that has the clearances needed. And what he does is he selects a new request. And this opens up the request form. The name, is optional. So we can, we can say that it's the front door request. And the access is where we select the clearance. So you see I hit the plus sign, and then here, if I know something on the keywords to a clearance, then I can select it that way, or I can hit the plus sign and go to the clearances that are available through that request site that I can request. So I've got the front door, and then that's a clearance that's for 15 days. That's what the clearance defaults to. This could be justification as a required field for if it's a temporary hire, a new hire, a contractor. I'm just going to put the justification reason as temp. The person is the person requesting. You have the ability to assign a document. So if this clearance assignment requires a site security training, that you could attach that site security document as part of the submittal process. And that's it. You name it. You put your justification, any documents that are required. If you had additional details, you could have user-defined fields. This one is, are they linked to the security department? No. But you could have, questions, certain information that is part of the process, the policies of the scenario, in other words. So once the form is filled out, we have a submit request. So again, this is the front door. This is an auto approve. So you'll notice that this immediately went to approve, and that the approvals process shows that the system approved it. So what that means is that Justin Lee can now go to the front door and proceed, through the front door. If at some point, this front door clearance from an audit standpoint, we can audit that process as well. So if somebody is an approver, they can log in and audit a clearance. But when you have a clearance that's configured from an auto approve standpoint, there is no management to it. The system basically defines that. But if you looked at that access request, Lee front door, if you looked in, Justin Lee's record, you can see that that clearance was assigned by the request, and it's valid for these dates. So somebody could go through, remove that clearance. Somebody could, delete that access request from an administrator standpoint, which would, in essence, remove that clearance from that request. So now they no longer have that clearance, and if Justin tries to get through the front door, they're going to be denied clearance. So that's an auto approve. If we logged in as another card holder or a multiple approver process. So I'll log in as John Doe. John Doe is going to fill out the request. And this is for the north-south door. The access to is to that north-south clearance. And then this defaults to 30 days. The justification is they're a contractor here for 30 days. So what's going to happen here is also you have the ability to attach a document. You have the ability to use custom UDF fields for information. But what's going to happen here is, because this is a multiple in order, I'm listed in that clearance as the first approver. So what should happen is I get an email, and here it is here at 11:25, notifying me that I have a pending request. Now Ken hasn't been notified. He's the second in the approval process. So right there, if I logged out and logged in as Ken, I shouldn't see a request. But if I log in as James, that request should be sitting there in my approvals. So now I have a request for the north-south doors, and that request is for this particular person, John Doe. I can review his information, who his manager is, what department he's with. If there's any documents that I can review that document, and the details being that he's a contractor for his justification. So all this is in line for an approval. So over on the right-hand side here, I have a reject and I have an approve. If I select the approve, I have the ability to make comments. Say all set. So now what happens here is that's disappeared from my pending list and has now been sent to Ken via email. So if I look on, Ken's email, you'll notice that email just came into Ken, which is notifying him that he has a pending request. So Ken logs into that portal after getting that pending request. And I have I'm logging in as Ken. He goes to his approver app, and there is that pending request. And you'll notice that there's an approvals option here. So you can actually see my approval, at what date and time, any comments that I make. He has the ability to go through and review those details, review any documents that may be attached, any additional details. and then base his decision. So now when he approves this, John Doe, if we go into John Doe's record, he has no clearance. So he's kind of pending that second approval. So Ken goes through, approves it. He can make some comments. And now that clearance has been assigned to John Doe. And you can see that it was done through an approval process, and the duration of that clearance assignment is the 30 days. Now, John Doe should be able to go to that, north and south door and be able to gain access, through that entry. And you can see John Doe going through the north door, and then we can see John Doe going through the south door. So from an audit standpoint, I know we talked about audit, and here's a good example of being able to audit. Ken's logged in. He was the approver of that clearance. If we go into the list of clearances that Ken's an approver for, and we go to that north-south clearance, these are all the cardholders that actually have clearance. And you could also switch between the person and the clearance to the actual request. And I can see here's the request that we just approved, for John Doe. And at any point in time, the approvers could come in, and if he finished his contract in 15 days and he's no longer, needs to have the other 15 days of clearance, that we can revoke that clearance as approvers. We could also renew it. Let's say he's, 30 days in and he's going to need another 30 days for his contract, that we could renew and resubmit, the request for another 30 days, which then goes back out to James first, and James would approve it and then get sent back to Ken. So I'm going to revoke this clearance, and in here, it's kind of required for a comment when you revoke, and I'm just going to say contract complete. And then you'll notice the status of that request has now been revoked. And if I go and I look at, the email side of what takes place, that revocation that just took place, we're emailing John Doe to let him know that, his clearance has been revoked, and this is the reason why. So there's an audit there for the requester himself. And then back here in Secure, if we look at John Doe's record, that clearance has now been removed, and John Doe has no ability with that area anymore. So you'll notice he gets rejected. So that's another scenario with a multiple approvers. And then we go back to another example of a request. Let's log back out here and look at Sydney Reed. I'm going to log in as another cardholder of Sydney Reed and submit another type of request. So on Sydney's, we're going to do the rear door. Sydney has no clearance. I'm going to log in and configure a request. And this is request. Access to is the rear door. Now, here, when I select the rear door, I have a name and I have a description of that clearance. And this is key too. When we look at the clearances and how they tie into this feature, we all know that some naming conventions for clearances, depending on the size of a company with multiple locations and multiple floors in those locations, clearance names from a naming convention can be hard for a cardholder to understand versus an administrator or an operator to understand. But if I look at this rear clearance that we're going to work with, in that approval tab, we can have a friendly name and a friendly description for what that clearance is. So when we're thinking about people requesting access, we can utilize these two naming fields to make it something that's going to make sense when somebody's requesting clearances. So that's something that's important to realize, is you're not stuck with viewing what the naming convention is by standard on your clearances versus what they're going to see in the portal. So we've selected that clearance. Now this clearance is good for 14 days. But if they're on contract and they only need it for a week, that they can, set a date below what the max is. This particular clearance can only be assigned for 14 days, but the person may only need it for 7 days, 5 days, so they can set that accordingly. And then the justification is they're a contractor, in that they're requesting clearance and they're gonna need a site security course before they can get into that area. So they can add a document to prove that training was completed. And again, if there's any additional details that need to be added to the request. So now when this is submitted, the people who manage that clearance would be contacted via email. And here's my email, 1135, that I have a pending request. I'm going to log off and log back in as myself. And I should see that pending request. And I can review those details, see that they're a contractor. I can pull up their documents and make sure that they've reviewed, signed, dated. And then at that point, I can approve the request. I can make notes if I want to. And now that pending request is removed from my list. And if I go and look at Sydney, we'll see that that rear door was applied for those 5 days that he needs. So now if I take Sydney to the rear door, we would see he has access to that door. Again, I can audit if Sydney finishes in 3 days. I can always go in and remove or revoke that request. If I look at it from an audit standpoint, I can see there's the last request. I can look at the history of the request, who approved it, what dates they were set for. I know he's finished his contract. I can go ahead and revoke and just contract complete. And then you'll see the status of that change to revoked. And if we go back to Seacare, you can see Sydney Reed no longer has that clearance. And Sydney Reed was notified here we go. Here's the revocation of that access. So those were 3 examples of different types of access requests. One more scenario before we go to questions would be somebody requesting access to someone else. If I go to my database and I just pull up a card holder and see that they've got a clearance. And I'm going to go ahead and have their supervisor request a clearance for them versus themselves requesting that clearance. So if it's another scenario where not every cardholder is a requester, but the only requesters are the managers of departments, and they're the ones who submit those types of requests for their team. I'll go ahead and log in as Ken. And this time, Ken's going to be a requester. And you can see Ken's already made requests for people within his department before. But this time, he's going to request for Marcia. And we'll do that access to the rear. And let's say it's temp. But this time, he's not requesting access for himself, so he can remove himself as the person. And then here, I'll start typing Marcia's name. As I'm typing, it's pulling up based on that character set, a list of cardholders that follows that criteria. I select Marcia. Any information, documents that I would like to attach, I could do so. This is again a 14-day clearance. I can submit that clearance, and then I'm notified as the approver. I just got that request at 11:40, and I am going to log in and approve that request. And we can see that request pending. This is for the rear clearance. I review it. I approve it. And now if I go into Marcia's record, Ken requested the clearance for rear to be added, and it was approved for the 14 days. So a couple of different scenarios for how you can apply the request process. What does that look like in Secure? We know that we can log into the portal, and we know that we can audit our clearances, and we know that we can remove access, even if it wasn't done through a formal request. I can remove clearance from, Ethan Brown has the rear clearance. Even though Ethan Brown wasn't assigned that clearance through a process, I'm the manager of that clearance. I have the ability to say who has clearance in my area. So I can go in and I can, select Ethan and say, I want to remove that clearance from Ethan Brown. He doesn't need to be in my area. So now if I go back and look at Ethan Brown's record, he doesn't have the rear clearance. It's been pulled. So not only can you audit, but then we have that review process. And that review process is if this clearance was a high security clearance where it has to be reviewed every 30 days, every 90 days, that I can set up that review process, to send me a notification. And then what I'm doing here is I'm reviewing those people that have clearance to my area. And if that is consistent with, what my my personnel are, then I can review complete, and then here all set, or whatever policy responses you need to make, you can then review complete. So the approvers can audit, they can review, and they can manage the approval process. What's that look like in Secure? We can think of it as auditing that takes place just like an operator has an auditing, assigning a clearance. All that's still, the same in Secure. From an audit standpoint, I can say over the last hour, what's taken place, and we can see the full auditing of, access requests that have been submitted, access requests that have been approved, the assignment of the clearance based on the approval. So all of that information, the states of approved to active, changed, specific details of what takes place during that approval is all logged in the audit. So you have that full audit capability. We can even set up reports in Secure, so that you have the ability to look at that information from a formal report standpoint. This is going to PDF, but this could be set to go to XLS or a spreadsheet. If I looked at what happened over the last hour, let's see the three scenarios that we kind of walk through right there with the revoked, approved, who was created by, the time it was created, the start and end dates for those clearances, what the name of that, the default name of that request was. So not only can you audit from the portal side, but you have that full audit capability in Secure. And that takes us to 11:45. I think maybe we can open it up for questions. Carol, do you want to jump back in?
So there are a lot of questions. Ken has been answering some of them, but I figured I can ask them of you for the good of the entire audience. And some of these may have been answered throughout your demonstration, but I'm going to ask them again.
Yep.
How does all of this work with approvers or requesters that are global users in an enterprise system?
Good question. So access workflow on an enterprise, it really comes down to how many of the requesters and approvers are global versus local. The access request sites, the personnel, the card holders. It really comes down to how many of those records are local, how many of them are global. Global clearances need to be associated from a mass standpoint. The access request sites that deal with local clearances and local personnel, they're local objects to the SAS, so there would be that building of it based on the enterprise. Not every enterprise has all global records. Not every enterprise has all global clearances. Some of the clearances are local clearances. Some of the card holders are local card holders. So it really comes down to the scenario of the enterprise. But depending on that would be where the portal's deployed. If it's deployed on the mass or if it's deployed on the SASs, again, it's based on the scenario.
Okay. What version of CQ 9000 is required to use the access management workflow?
And Jake, I just looked this up. The original access workflow feature set was added to version 2.6. Recommended 2.8 and above. We did add a lot of feature sets to the to access workflow. But we did add the initial functionality within version 2.6.
And when Ken,
Thank you.
yeah, when Ken refers to new features, you know, the demonstration is from a broad sense with different scenarios, but this features like a manager approval that was added in 2.8, where regardless of who the approvers are, the request is sent to their manager first, and their manager would approve it, and then it would go to the approver. So there's different features that were added along the way, from 2.6 to 2.7 to 2.8 and 2.90.
Do the approvers need to have access to the Secure app or just the web portal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, the PowerPoint, the slides that I showed at the beginning, kind of had that reference. I kind of talked over it. When you think of approvers and requesters logging into the portal, their roles and responsibilities in the portal is all they can do. They can only request a clearance, and they can only approve a clearance that they're tied to as an approver. They can't log into Secure. They're not operators in Secure. They don't have the ability to log into admin or monitoring or any of the other apps. They can only authenticate through the portal to perform what option they're selected as.
Can the emails be customized in Secure?
Jake, I just responded to that question. I talked to product management ahead of time before this call, and today you cannot, but tomorrow you will in version 3.0.
Okay. I'm assuming the link sent to the approver will not be a local host address, but rather the IP of the system. Can you confirm this?
Yeah, that's a good point. Localhost is because I'm on a VM, and everything is local to that box. Obviously, directing that URL to the right location is going to reflect how it's installed. But obviously, to authenticate over to Secure, they would have to be on the same network to communicate to Secure, to authenticate, or to where that portal is installed.
Will this only work with the Ultra controllers? Is there a workaround for sites that have older controllers?
Yeah, another good question. It'll work with any of the iStars. The only reference I make to the Ultras is for that expiring clearances piece. The only iStar that supports that option of expiring clearances, which allows you to set a number of days, is the iStar Ultra and above, like the G2. It doesn't mean that clearances won't work from an approval standpoint or request standpoint. It's just they won't have that option selected, and they won't have the option to like in this case, this clearance doesn't have the option to set a number of days that clearance is valid. So it would just be assigned to the requester until it's revoked. So the iStar Pros, the iStar Edges, functionality would be the same. They just wouldn't have that duration.
Okay, the next one is a two-part question. What expiration date takes precedence? If the clearance has an activation and expiration date, and can a request have no expiration date?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So there's actually a couple of different ways to expire a clearance. A clearance itself can have an expiration date, and then when you assign a clearance within a cardholder record, the clearance within the cardholder record can have a start and end date and time. And then when you assign an access workflow clearance, it also can have a beginning end date and time. So the assigned clearance through Access Workflow should overwrite the existing clearance within the cardholder record. What I'm not sure of is if the clearance itself was already expired. I'm pretty sure that the expiration of the clearance itself will take the override permissions pertaining to whether or not you're getting through the door. I will definitely take a note of that and get back to everyone. Good question.
Thanks, Ken. Can an approver add someone to approve for them if they are away?
That's a good question. So that approver would have to be associated to the clearance. So if you think of it as either or, so if we're looking at a clearance that has multiple approvers associated to it, not in order, any selected approver. So if the key person that approves is myself and Ken's my backup, I could list Ken as an approver. Both Ken and I will be notified by email that there's a pending request. So if I'm out, Ken would still get that email to know that he has a pending request.
Right. You just can't, the approver can't assign someone else unless they have access to Secure and can go into the clearance and then assign someone if they're not already assigned.
Right, that's an operator.
That's correct.
Let's see. When we add a user to be allowed to request or approve, the automatic email is sent to let them know. Is it possible to suppress the email? If we enable this for everyone in our company, that email could look like spam since it says to log in with your domain credentials.
Yeah, this is another good question. This came up recently with a large university, and I know that there was some back and forth with engineering on that, and I believe there's been a workaround for that. And Ashley, I think that was one of the things that was built in. I can confirm, we can confirm, what that workaround is, and what features have been built in, for that. But that's a good point. If you have an import per se that brings in, a couple of thousand records, and those records are selected to be requesters, then those couple of thousand people are going to be receiving emails from Secure introducing them to the portal. So I believe this workaround, I can touch base with Ashley on that.
If we assign a personnel group as an approver, it's any one person in that group, not everyone, correct?
I'm sorry, can you say that one again?
If we assign a personnel group as an approver, it's any one person in that group, not everyone, correct?
Correct.
So it's just one person in that group, not the whole group to approve.
Yeah, correct. I think there's two different ways, but if it's associated group-wise, anyone in that group can approve it, because you're going back to on the clearance itself here that we can add and only look at groups of people, and when we assign that group, instead of it being individuals, you can basically say anyone in that group.
Okay. can you have a group of doors set based on a project? For example, if I'm requesting access to an area for a project, I have a set group of doors that need to be approved for contractors to have access to those areas. Can those be grouped based on a group of doors?
Yeah, the door group itself, that group of doors would be configured to the clearance. And then that clearance would be what's requested. So in a clearance itself, when we create a clearance, the doors can individually be added, or you can group and say, oh, I want to group the front door group, which would have all of the front doors from different buildings assigned to that group. That would have to be configured to a clearance, and then the clearance is what's requested through the process.
Okay, does it show all the clearances or just the ones for approvers?
Yeah, so when a requester logs in, it's based on the request site. So if we look at the Software House request site, this is where you're saying this list of requesters can request this list of clearances. This is all customizable by the customer. So you can set it up such that whatever requesters are tied to that location, they can only request these specific clearances. And on the clearance side itself, that's where you're saying this clearance can be approved by this list of people based on the approval rule.
We have quite a few questions left, and it seems like we're out of time. So my suggestion is to, I can download these questions, and I can have the experts here answer the questions, and we can send out an FAQs doc. Or the individuals who ask the questions, we can reach out to them individually. So I want to thank everybody for joining today, and I want to especially thank Jake for a great demonstration and Ken for helping out with the questions. And I hope everybody has a safe and enjoyable weekend. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.